there, welcome to this episode of Author Success Show. The special guest we have today is Michael Seaver. Michael is an award-winning executive coach, author, keynote speaker, and podcast host. He's on a mission to unlock human potential to help people uncover and live their purpose and live a more meaningful and authentic life. His unique methodology has revolutionized how leaders can live authentically and how organizations engage employees. In today's episode, he's going to share his experience of writing and publishing his book, I Know. Hey, Michael, welcome to Author Success Show.
Hey, Jyotsna. Thank you so much for having me today.
It's my pleasure. So when did you first have this intention to write this book?
Oh my gosh. This is the thing is that for years, clients, I work as an executive coach and leadership consultant, and I speak publicly quite a bit. And so for years, clients told me that I needed to write a book, but I was always at that place of like, I don't really know if I'm ready, right? I didn't have the confidence. Maybe I was a little bit naive. Maybe I was a little bit stressed or nervous or anxious or unsure, or I didn't really believe that my story mattered, right? In some meaningful way. Maybe I was scared. But then in March of 2020 in America, right, the stay-at-home orders started. Yeah. So I started to talk with my writing coach, and I was like, hey, maybe now is the appropriate or right time because things in America shifted throughout the summer of 2020. So I sat in meditation for a couple of days and just kind of thought about it and said, do I really have the courage to do this? Is now the right time? Does my story really matter? So I connected the dots. I decided to make some investments and updates to my website. Obviously, I worked with the writing coach, and I realized that it was a good time for me to recount my journey and kind of reflect on it and think through it, or to define the processes that I utilized with clients, or maybe figure out a way to share a couple of client stories. And also, I kind of felt like humanity was actually ready for my message and what it is that I talk about or what it is that we do. So my book, it's called I Know. Yeah. And it's really a culmination of my life's work thus far. It tells a lot of pieces of my personal story, a lot of psychological research and history background, but it also tells quite a few of my clients' stories and their journeys through using the book in the process. So my hope is that if someone reads the book, they can not only sense a little bit of my fear and anxiety and nervousness and what I did to overcome it in order to tell my story. Maybe that gives them the courage to do a little bit of that for themselves. But hopefully it also helps them move to a place of saying like, yeah, I could definitely do this too.
Absolutely. I'm sure, that's the confidence that a book gives, that's the impact it leaves on the reader's mind, right? So I'm really glad that you spoke about your writing coach. A lot of people struggle for years thinking that they have to do this all by themselves. So did somebody tell you, or did you see other authors use writing coaches, which helped you decide that you should also have one?
Absolutely. And so there have been a number of folks in my network that had partnered with a writing coach and, or in some cases, a ghostwriter to be able to help with the book in its entirety. And I have always really enjoyed writing. Since I started my coaching practice in the year 2011, I've really enjoyed writing. And so I was just under this impression that I could do it or that I had enough of a background to do it. But I knew that writing articles and blogs for media was quite a bit different than actually putting together an entire book. So by talking to some folks in my network and by looking up some good information online through self-published places, it was like, yeah, there's a lot here that I don't know, but I also needed the accountability that comes from having that coach available. Yeah. Her name was Laura. So Laura was really, really insightful and helpful to hold me accountable, to help ask me really meaningful questions that I wouldn't have been able to answer myself. And she gave me that safe place to be able to tell my story in ways that I might not have if it was just me writing.
Absolutely. I think that's the power of working with an expert who has been doing this professionally, right? It makes a lot of difference.
It does.
So tell me, you've been blogging for years. I know that because I've seen hundreds of blog posts on your website. How different is writing a book as compared to writing blogs?
To me, it is radically different. And so for me to write a blog, or for any person to write a blog, maybe it's you come up with the idea or the main thesis, and then you kind of break it out into 4 or 5 sections and things that you want to say in each of those sections. And that might take 2 to 3 hours time. But when it came to my process for actually working on the book, I knew that it was going to be a 6, 7, or 8 month process for me. Now, some people can do it in 30 days. Some people can do it in a couple of years, but I intentionally invested about 6 months of time partnering with the writing coach to really do it. So in our discussions, what we really focused in on was, what is the main thesis of the book? And after we solidified that, then we said, okay, how many chapters do we want? And then we devised a set of like thesis statements for each chapter to make sure that everything really fit well together with the main thesis of the book. So then what we did is that she showed me her structure. So each chapter is essentially 5 sections, a good story, some psychological research, some process, and then a couple of like stories to close, but then also key takeaways at the end. So we went into the process very specifically looking at every chapter having these 5 sections, which was really important.
Right.
So then every other Thursday, we had a 1.5-hour phone call. And inside that phone call, Laura was effectively interviewing me. So she gave me the questions about a week in advance, focused in on that specific chapter. And I would go through prior to our call and come up with my talking points and my speaking points and the research that I wanted to be able to reference. And then so what she would do is she would use the Otter app to be able to talk to text the things that I was saying. So everything that I said was talk to text into a document that she then helped to kind of reframe and move around so that I could go through and really make it my own. So we did that over a 6-month time frame to say, here's the thesis, here's each chapter's thesis, here is each section of the respective chapter. What do we need to say in this? And then after doing the interviews and after doing the first couple of drafts, we then went through, and actually I went through and rewrote, if you will, the entire book again, right? All the edits and all the making sure that it fit into the narrative I was looking for. But then I gave the book to 6 of my friends. And I said, I want you to have 30 days to really look this over. Does it make sense? Is it missing anything? What would you add? And then after I received all of their feedback, I went through the process of editing again. And so comparatively—
So are these friends a part of your like target clients, or were they?
Yeah, well said. And that was really the key point, is that I became very clear at the very beginning when we were thinking about the thesis and we were thinking about the chapter's theses about who is the ideal client, what is the feeling that I want them to feel before they pick up the book, and what is the feeling that I want them to feel after they're done with the book. And it just so happened that I have a pretty diverse set of friends that I could reach out to say, hey, I want to give you early access to my book. You fit into this kind of target client area, if you will. And so the feedback that they provided was absolutely phenomenal, because very different age ranges, but very different places on planet Earth, but kind of the same target audience of a person who is a little bit disengaged or unhappy or wondering what to do next with their life. And then the book is supposed to walk them through 9 different processes to help them get to that point of clarity. So the things that they offered back in terms of ideas and suggestions and new research was exactly what I needed, because it helped me to feel great that the content in the book was going to really strongly appeal to the ideal audience after I published it.
Right. Thank you so much, for sharing this process in such detail, because I feel that this amount of work is really needed to put together a great book. I see so many people who teach how to publish a book over a weekend and things like that. And I think it's crazy. I mean, you can do that technically, but I'm not sure what's going to be the quality like. And you were intentional about investing 6 to 8 months of your time in getting the manuscript ready, right? So one thing that I really like about the way you and your book coach structured this whole thing is it is not just about your story like a memoir, nor is it like a how-to guide alone, but it's a mix of both. And that's my favorite style, story plus strategy. So how was that process of, getting your stories and your client stories, and also making sure that there is a system or a structure to this whole thing?
Yeah. And so, Laura, so when we think about communication preferences and styles, you wouldn't know this, Jyotsna, but I'm actually really introverted and shy. And Laura is much more extroverted, people-oriented, and very bubbly. And so her brain thinks in terms of stories. My brain thinks in terms of logical, linear facts, figures, and data. And so we both really walked into the process of knowing that my brain was defaulting to only wanting to share the psychological research. And that's where Laura's capacity to be able to ask me really thoughtful questions was enormously beneficial. because she explained to me and set very clear expectations that there needed to be a certain number of words. We needed to evoke this specific emotion. The story had to be connected to this particular thesis. And when she was able to show me how this client's story connected to the thesis and how it was going to evoke the right emotion for people to want to read the rest of the chapter, that's when I started to see the connection. And so without her help, I wouldn't have told the stories as in depth as possible. So I needed the safety and the security of being able to tell my story to her, and then having her help me get the right verbiage onto the page to make sure it made sense and that it felt safe for me to share. But then also the same thing with my clients. And so there's 2 or 3 stories inside the book that are very much about me, but there's 3 or 4 stories that are very much about my clients, and lots of little snippets and little examples here or there. But her holding me accountable to tell stories that were filled with emotion was what made the book as good as it is.
Well said. And it's really good to have another person who's not exactly like you, so that they bring out the other important aspects that can be added to the book, right? So you've shared a lot of personal stories, like the story where you attempted suicide as well, right?
Yep.
Was it easy or difficult for you? Because I see that there are a lot of successful coaches, entrepreneurs out there, but for everybody, there are these low points in their life, which many people do not share authentically because it makes them feel weak and vulnerable. But you went ahead and shared it in a book, which is available for everybody to read. Was it intimidating for you?
Oh my gosh, yes. And when I first experienced this desire to not want to be on earth anymore, right, wanting to commit suicide, it was May of 2019. Some really tough stuff had happened. And of course, I open the book, I know, telling the story about that and why it all occurred the way that it did, or what I've learned since that has given me better insight. But very few people in my world knew about that. And Laura was very good about pushing me to say, hey, if you tell this story, it's going to be a great hook. It's going to land the message even more deeply. So she was able to help me understand that by short-term sacrifice of me being willing to tell my story, that was actually going to set a really strong foundation for the purpose of the book and what it could do for people as they were reading it. And then it took me a couple of months, right? October, November, December of 2020. It took me a couple of months to get to the point of acceptance. So I had to reach out to quite a few of my friends and family to say, hey, you don't know this about me, but I'm going to share it in my book. And that was very anxiety producing for me. I was very nervous and worried because I had to have about 10 conversations with people that I had to share that. I had to receive their emotion back. I had to receive the anxiety back. But even though that short-term pain was challenging or hard, what has come back to me since January 1st of 2021, when the book was published, has made it all worth it, right? Because now I get direct messages on social media or emails or sometimes text messages or even from people that say, I had no idea, but just so you know, I was going through something similar.
Wow.
And so when that happened, it made it worth it for me. So I was scared to share it, and then Laura encouraged me to and helped me understand why it would be valuable. And then I had to socialize it with family and friends, which was pretty challenging.
So that they don't get taken aback, right, when they read the book.
Right. Yeah. And I don't want to surprise anyone, but there are just certain things that we all go through on earth that, some are public, some aren't. And so I'm really glad that the book ended up creating a psychological safety for many readers, that they felt safe to be able to then share their own version of hardship or challenge, whether it was with me or someone in their life. So now I know that it was completely the right path for me to take, although it was hard at the beginning.
Yeah, I can imagine. Right. So thank you so much for sharing this as well, because a lot of people think that a book is this professional tool to get all these leads for my business, and they keep it really professional. But then only when you share your authentic story can your readers connect to you at a personal level. And then if you have to sell anything, they'll be more than happy to buy because they know, like, and trust you. So it becomes a no-brainer for them to work with you. So I'm sure you would have had a lot of professional reasons to write your book, but I can also see that personally, it was like a healing journey for you while you wrote the book, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a wonderful way to look at it, Jyotsna. And that really is what 2020 was for me as I was working with Laura, the writing coach, to be able to figure this out, is that I really had to make that conscious choice in March, April, May of 2020 to say, do I want to go through this healing journey? And using her kind of as the guide or as the vehicle by which I was going to heal. So I had lots of time for reflection. I had lots of time for journaling, lots of time to think. And then eventually in the latter part of the year, lots of time for conversation. And that's really what it was. It was me telling my story and me healing my own emotional, personal wounds in a way that allows for others to know that it's okay for them to do themselves. And so what I try to talk about in the book is that Earth has transitioned from what used to be referred to as the age of Pisces, and we're now in something called the age of Aquarius. And that transition energetically on Earth has been really challenging and difficult because in the age of Pisces, people were they very much believed that their personal meaning came from being associated with some other brand, some sports team, some religion, some corporation, some place. And right now, the age of Aquarius, what we're moving into is that every human being will find meaning in their own heart from just knowing their own personal mission. And so I realized that as Earth was making this transition into this new age of energy, that I needed to use my personal example and story as a path or a process or an emotion-filled way for someone to know what to do themselves. And so it was hard to figure that out or to land that. But then now that here we are about 8-9 months into the book being live, and I can see how many things have already shifted in society around the world, and that people are much, much more open to this message because they're looking for meaning for themselves.
Right. So this transition is happening right now, right, in the world as we speak.
Yes. Yeah. And we're seeing it specifically in America, where there's a lot of distrust of big government or big corporations or in other things. And so that distrust, we're seeing a lot of the things that they were doing behind the scenes, kind of in the dark. We're seeing it come to light, right? A lot of unethical behavior. And perhaps that's happening in other countries around the world too. So what's transitioning, right, is as many of these bad events or circumstances or unethical behavior is coming to light, soon there will be much, much more of like a utopian world that is available to all of us, where we don't do things behind the scenes. We transparently and very openly communicate, or there will be some structural changes to the way that society functions. So in chapter 2 of my book, I talk about, hey, here are some things that might be coming to Earth in the next couple of years, but we're in the hardest part of the transition right now because there's so much emotion and there's so many people expressing themselves. And we're trying to figure out what is right and what is wrong. What are those dark, unethical things that have been hidden for so long? And how do they come to light in a way that can benefit everybody?
Wow. So while writing the book, did you actually spend a lot of time in researching all these things, reading other people's articles, or were these things that you already knew and it was already in your mind? Like, I just want to understand what percentage of the book involved research and what was it that you already knew?
I would say 35 to 40% of the book was based on my personal experiences and based on client experiences, based on my personal experiences, based on things that I had been through. But another 65% of the book was me really sitting in my own emotions and having to explore things about myself in the summer of 2020 that I didn't know, or having conversations with other people or doing additional research. And that's why the every other Thursday meetings with the writing coach were so important, because it gave me time to do additional research, to reflect, to connect the dots, to see things in a different perspective. And so, yes, I certainly did bring personal and client stories, but that summer was an awful lot of new exploration. And there are over 70 different citations and notes at the end of the book from different research that I had done to make it make sense for me and to hopefully make it make sense for the reader. So I think it was, 35-ish% of my own experiences from the previous 10 years of being a coach, but probably 60 to 65% of new things that I connected the dots on in 2020.
Fantastic. I really also believe that it's nice to just be open and share your story, but to substantiate that and to really validate things, and also, as you mentioned, connect the dots, research is really, really useful. And it also makes you feel good, right? That what you've been doing is right because research also proves it.
Yes, completely. And so I'm so thankful that I took the time to do that and to connect those dots in that way, because the material that has come from the book since then has been such a blessing for me. And there was a couple folks that had read it in the early part of 2021, and they approached me and said, we really need to do a book club based on your book.
Wow.
And that was something that I hadn't really ever considered, but after we decided to do it, so April through August of 2021, we did the first ever what's called the You and I Know Circle with 12 finance executives from around America. And it was really enlightening to say, okay, here's what I wrote. Here are the 6 friends at the end of 2020 that were giving me feedback. And now these finance executives from around the United States, the 12 of them, what do they think about the processes? How are they impacted by it? How did it benefit them? And so I've even gotten this further look into the impact of the book through the lens of what is it that people in a safe group, like a reading group or a reading club, what is it that they say, right? What are they talking about? What is it that they're sharing of their personal story with one another? So it's given me further confidence that the things that I did the research on or the things that I shared were meaningful and impactful in lots of ways.
Right. And I'm sure you wouldn't have expected these kind of opportunities to come up when you were writing the book, right?
No, I to your point, writing the book was really about healing. It was really about telling my story. And I couldn't have predicted that these folks would approach me and ask me to lead a book club. And so the funny thing is that I didn't have expectations for how the book would change my business. But in a very short period of time, basically 3 months, the book really significantly altered my business. And that there's much bigger opportunities coming to me for executive coaching or leadership consulting or training, or the launch of the You and I Know Circle and how that's going to grow and to become a thing in society. I wouldn't have expected that. And so for everybody watching or listening, right, making this investment in yourself is not only healing, it's not only learning, but something in your life after the book is published is going to change in a very good way. And so that's what I really want people to understand, is that it's a little bit unexpected and you can't predict it, but the feeling and the emotion and the impact that comes later is so profound.
Thank you so much for dropping that value bomb, because a lot of people, when they have that initial discovery call with me, would ask me, how many books should I sell to get the ROI from this book project? And I'm going to ask them to listen to this conversation to really understand that the ROI is so much bigger than just the number of books you sell. What do you think about that?
My gosh. Yeah, I completely agree. And you can share this freely and broadly, Jyotsna, because that's really the truth, is that I when I partnered with the writing coach, the intent was not to sell a certain number of books. That was not the point. I knew that it was a thing, healing. It was telling my story. It was creating psychological safety for the reader or the listener. But really what it was is that I wasn't expecting to make the investment back on book sales. But all of a sudden, the bigger projects, the You and I Know Circle, different level speaking engagements where I was making more money per speaking engagement, the investment that I made in the writing coach has already paid itself off, not from book sales, but from other ways that my business has grown and developed and become more influential. And so for everybody listening, like, really pay attention to those other things that come into your experience after the book is published, because your credibility has grown so much.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the marketing side of the book, because once all the difficult parts of writing and publishing is done, then it's totally up to you on how well you market the book, right? Since you also have self-published your book. So what were some of the things you did consciously which helped you attract all these opportunities?
Sure. So I made the choice in July of 2020 to contract with a public relations agent who had helped other authors. So from the last 6 months of 2020 through the first 3 months of 2021, I was engaged with the public relations agent. Now, you don't have to do that, but I, again, didn't have as much experience, or I didn't have a massive following on social media that I couldn't, leverage or use. So we went through a multi-step process of her finding ways to get me written articles inside media across the United States. And so we were trying to build, in the latter part of 2020, we were trying to build my credibility ahead of the book being published. Right. So we specifically went after bigger name publications around Arizona, but of course around the United States. And we really wanted to get as many article placements or feature placements for me in those places so that they would be aware of me.
Right.
So that was the first one. Now, the second thing that we did is that we added a section to my website that allowed for anybody to come and talk to me for 30 minutes for free. So anybody around the world that wants to talk for 30 minutes for free, they're welcome to chat with me. That was another vehicle. We also did monthly webinars. And so a webinar about something in the book without telling people that it was really about the book.
Yeah.
And so we would get 25, 50, sometimes 75 people from around the United States to attend a webinar. And at the end of the webinar, I would announce that the book was coming. And that was something that really helped to solidify. So we did a lot of media outreach, and we did an awful lot of how do we find a way to get people engaged with Michael, from having the free strategy call on my website to having the webinars. And then she was in the process of trying to get me podcast spots, and so I could be a guest on other people's podcasts.
Right.
So we tried that, and that really did help. And then after the book was actually published, we started to make mentions of it in social media by sharing testimonials or by sharing different snippets from the book. I have a newsletter that goes out once a month, so we always mention something about the book inside the newsletter. And then we even did a book signing back in my hometown where I was raised, in the state of Michigan in America. And that was really beneficial and fun because there was some media around that. And so we really tried like what we would refer to as an omni-channel approach, right? We tried a lot of different places with my target audience to just get interest in the book. And so anytime that there was somebody who took a picture of themselves with the book, I automatically reshared it. I've even requested from folks who have read it to make recommendations on Amazon or Barnes & Noble or Google or Apple, and I pay a lot of attention to those. So taking an omni-channel approach to marketing starts probably 6 months before you're actually going to publish.
Yeah.
And then in the months that follow, it's very much about building what's called the law of social proof, is that when you share testimonials and recommendations and people can start to see the impact that the book had on others, now all of a sudden they want to be a part of it too.
Right. Thank you for again walking us through every single thing that you did, because again, there is this misconception that let me run Amazon ads or Facebook ads for a week during the launch and then the job is done. But then I can clearly see that right now we are speaking in the month of September. It's been 9 months since your book launched, and we are still talking so many amazing things about the book. And I think a book that way is like this evergreen marketing vehicle that you can use to talk about your work for the rest of your life, because once you're an author, you are always looked upon as an author. And I'm really glad, Michael, that you're making good use of the book and not just using it to promote yourself and the business, but also touching so many lives and helping so many people heal through the book. So would you have any final words of advice for people who are still on the fence, thinking if they really have the expertise to write a book, or should they wait for another 10 years?
I think a lot of people need to call Jyotsna. They just need to call you. And I mean that very wholeheartedly, because I spent the early part of 2020 in doubt, having fear, not knowing that I was capable, not believing in myself. And I can tell you, here we are now 15, 16 months later, and I am so immensely grateful that I challenged myself and that I invested into this. Like, it really matters. So if you feel that fear or anxiety, please find a way to engage a writing coach or another system like what Jyotsna offers, because it really does help you to feel a different level of clarity or confidence or psychological safety to tell your story. And because Laura was there for me, I hadn't met Jyotsna yet. Laura was there for me. She helped me tell the stories, and I could include the research and the processes. And it helped me so much to feel safe to be able to do this. And I want everybody else to feel safe too, because you don't know what will come after the book is actually published. But I'm pretty sure that if you make consistent investments day after day after day after day to tell little stories about the book, that you're going to continue to heal and feel even better as a result of investing the time and money. But you're also going to impact people and share your message much more broadly. So keep finding that way to share for yourself, right? And keep finding a way to get other people to then tell their story, because I think that's what people really genuinely enjoy on earth now, right? We like stories. We like to be uplifted by them. We like to grow and develop. We like to help others grow and develop. So why not keep helping one another grow into the best versions of ourselves?
Well said, Michael. Where can people find you and the book?
Yeah, I'll put it up here just so if anybody's watching on video, you can see it here. but it's called I Know, a practical guide for awakening to what's within and finding work-life integration. But if anybody goes to michaelseaver.com, my middle name is Scott, so Michael S. Seaver, 2 S's in the center, michaelseaver.com. On that, you're going to find, as Jyotsna mentioned earlier, quite a few blogs. You're going to find a page devoted to the book specifically. There's podcast information there. There's media mentions. There's the articles that Jyotsna talked about. So it's really a hub or a resource for a person that is a little bit disengaged or unhappy with some aspect of their life, that they'll be able to matriculate and transition to being very, very confident and clear about what they're supposed to do with their life next.
Awesome. We are going to have all the links right below this in the show notes. And thank you once again, Michael, for coming on Author Success Show. And you are so inspiring. Keep inspiring the world with your work and by just being the person you are. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. Thank you, Jyotsna.